Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Coalition of the Willing just recently met discussing the potential enforcement of peace in Ukraine. And let's just say the signals are very mixed. But nonetheless, I do feel that the important parts came out from that meeting, and we know how Ukraine exactly will secure peace on its territory going forward. So let's jump into it shortly. Welcome to Ukraine Daily News. Some people reached out to me asking why we haven't seen Ukrainian strikes on Russian oil refineries for a couple of days. Does it mean that Ukraine stopped? And the answer is no, because over the last night, we saw Ukrainian drones striking Russia's largest Rosneft refinery in Ryazan region. Actually, there was multiple strikes on various oil facilities across Russia, but the biggest one and the one that we have visual confirmation for is the Rosneft Ryazan oil facility. This facility has already been struck on the 2nd of August, which forced it to cut down the production, and since then there was repairs made in the facility, but now it has been struck once again. Ukraine is very clearly approaching this whole campaign systematically, and they are targeting things that gets repaired to make sure that they are not working once again. Another oil facility that got struck was the oil storage in the occupied Luhansk region. This is a purely military storage that was initially investigated by partisans that showed the location of the storage facility, and it was struck overnight. And while the occupiers are claiming that the tanks were completely empty and there was literally nothing there, and the only thing that was burning is the debris of the Ukrainian drones, well, the pillar of flame that was lighting up this whole area overnight clearly shows that it is not the case. But let's talk about the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. A couple of days ago, on the 3rd of September, more than 2,000 nations from US to Canada to Australia, Japan, and other European nations were meeting in Paris or online to talk about security guarantees for Ukraine. As for now, we know that there is about 26 countries that are willing to participate in this coalition with something. As far as we understood, their participation is going to be varying. Most notable was the statement by the Finnish President Alexander Stubb, who revealed that Trump had urged tighter coordination on sanctions to choke Russia's oil and gas revenues. Trump right now is a little bit sad that Putin decided to go party with China instead of him, so he's now a little bit mad about this, which is benefiting Ukraine and not benefiting the European states that should have been getting off of the dependence on the Russian energy resources a long time ago, including LNG that is still being used by France, Belgium, and other countries, as well as the natural gas via the pipelines such as Slovakia and Hungary. So I definitely welcome the pressure on Hungary and Slovakia coming from Trump. But what I would like to do is I would like to ask your permission to cut through BS, because Coalition of the Willing is a purely political exercise, so there's a lot more statements than there is substance. So excuse me for not reading every major based statements in support for Ukraine and how good everyone is. Therefore, I will speak plainly and I will talk about what actually matters. Coalition of the Willing is a bit of a joke, because the whole premise is that once there is a peace between, or at least ceasefire, between Russia and Ukraine, then the Coalition of the Willing will be sending in forces that will help control certain parts and territory of Ukraine, and supposedly they should be encouraging Ukraine somehow that the war will not resume. However, when actually pushed, whether or not the forces that will be sent to Ukraine, will they actually stand up to Russia? Will the skies will be closed over Ukraine if the Russian missiles will fly? Whether or not if there's going to be some forces on the demarcation line or some kind of a demilitarized zone, whether if Russian forces start advancing, whether they will stop these forces, the answer is very clear no, coming from everyone in this coalition of the willing. Sorry for this sort of a statement, but if they're not willing to defend, what are they willing of? And that's why this is a bit of a joke. However, there is also a very positive point here. This positive point comes from the general narrative that Ukraine was able to build in their tandem with Europe. And it is a common position on how security can look like going forward. And here we need to return about a year and a half, when I was talking about the security guarantees for Ukraine. And we were discussing a couple of real security guarantees. And I was telling you that it will demand certain investments from the Europeans. Security option number one for Ukraine is nukes. Well, no one really wants to give Ukraine the nukes, and as well as approve of that will not come from United States in any format. So I think we all don't have to spend too much time on it. The option number two was that Europeans will send in troops, and then these troops will act as a deterrence for Russia, and this can be done either by the troops on the territory of Ukraine, or they can be a legally binding Article 5 like an agreement. And that one is very clearly falling through because we in Europe are absolutely not ready for any kind of enforcement of peace. We are not ready to fight, and this is a problem for us. Thankfully, Ukrainians are, which brought us about a year and a half on the discussion, how could the peace look like if the main enforcer of peace is Ukraine itself? And I explained that the big issue here is going to be who is going to pay for it. Because for Ukraine to sustain peace, they would need to have quite a numerous army stationed. They would need to have that military present in case Russia attacks, as well as develop their own capabilities. And at that time, the problem was that Europeans definitely did not want to shoulder the bill for it. They didn't want to invest in this type of security. And therefore, a year and a half ago, it was a non-starter. Things changed since then. Like Donald Trump's involvement, in a sense, also pushed Europeans. And I want to underscore here, like some Trump supporters want me to claim that it's Trump's achievement that he did it with Europeans, but it's more like Trump set his house on fire, completely ruining the alliance and standing of democratic nations in the world, elevating the opposition powers to now Europeans just looking at all of their investments burning in their flames and trying to figure out how we can survive against the rising China and that opposition of evil that was pretty much created by the mismanagement of the American administration. So if you want me to give credit to Trump that he did this, then you're welcome. The fact that China right now is #1 spot for the authoritarians to flock around is in a large sense thanks to Donald Trump. But the understanding that Pax Americana is pretty dead and the new world basically says if you don't defend yourself, you're cooked, came to Europeans, and that's when they started falling behind Ukrainians, because definitely Ukrainians have the resolve to pursue the fight for democracy. And while Europeans are still trying to get their factories working, rearmaments procedures, and revise their views on the world, Ukraine right now is an actual deterrence force. So what happened is the understanding that Europeans would need to shoulder that money came to them, if I say it very briefly. So what is being discussed right now with regards to potential peace? So in case if there is an actual ceasefire somehow, and Ukraine is having a breather from the Russian onslaught, then Europeans can actually start sending troops and station them to take care of the Ukrainian non-vital tasks, cutting off some of the costs that Ukraine would need to maintain the same amount of forces that it has now, and will allow Ukraine to focus on the things that it needs defending. And in that perspective, having some kind of a third-party forces on territory of Ukraine, it's more of a fantasy coming from some fantasy land proposals. No, Ukraine will be defending its own borders, it will be defending its own territory and its own ability to stop the Russians. So one of the three security guarantees pathways that I've outlined a year and a half ago now is being acknowledged by the European leaders. And maybe they're not fully yet understanding the full extent of their participation, but we definitely see that they're getting there. And we are seeing Ukraine actually becoming this backbone of security guarantees. And then you can add any kind of political flair to that, whether Ukraine should be joining the European Union, whether there should be some kind of agreements, memorandums signed, it doesn't matter. The main and important point, the absolute TLDR, is Ukraine must have big and powerful military, and that is what's going to protect them from Russia attacking again. That protection and that military will be co-funded by Europeans, by them bringing in the expertise of what they know, technology, common development of weapons, and just beefing up Ukraine in places where Ukraine just is willing to outsource, like patrolling the border with Moldova or sorts. Therefore, I think this coalition of the willing, while politically it's a bit of a joke, I do think that there is certain value that came out of it anyways. Fascinating picture appeared. A picture of Azerbaijani MiG-29 plane with Ukrainian markings have been spotted over Ukraine. Azerbaijan, which used to be within the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union and Russia thought as well, has drifted away very far from Putin's orbit. And now they are driving their own independent politics, despite the fact how I feel about the dictator of Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijani has been deteriorating their relationship with Russia, and there was threats that Azerbaijan will be sending weapons. But the fact that there is now a MiG-29 plane that's clearly was belonging to Azerbaijan some time ago and is now part of Ukrainian Air Force, it does look beautiful. And if you like the way that the plane looks, you might also like clicking subscribe button to support this channel and promote this video in the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for the shameless plug-in. Let's continue. Ukrainian drone teams have located and struck a pretty juicy targets. On the Zaporizhia direction, they were able to find and destroy the launcher and the S-36 guidance station of the S-300V system. Arguably the most important parts of this anti-air system. And the fact that they were able to do it by using drones, again, just underscores how capable Ukrainians have become and how advanced the drone warfare is. Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Armed Forces, General Syrsky, has came out with statements that Ukraine needs to improve their anti-drone defense capabilities, and they will be building a layered defense against the Russian drones. It is great news that there is going to be an initiative into this direction. I think this follows further to the statements that Ukrainians will be producing their anti-air drones in larger quantities, and I believe that this is a unified effort in building a structured defense network against the aerial targets. On the night between the 2nd and 3rd of September, 2 Russian Shahid-type drones crossed the Polish border, and instead of being intercepted and shot down, Polish authorities allowed them to return to the Ukrainian territory, essentially allowing the attack to commence from the Polish direction. Again, I want to ask us Europeans, what are we doing? Are we definitely ready to defend ourselves? And is this okay? Russians are as evil as they are stupid, and we have another tragic confirmation of this. The demining convoy got struck by the Russian strike team. Russian surveillance drones was flying over Chernihiv region, which is to the north of Kyiv, when it saw a column of white vehicles that had no markings on them. And apparently the Russian operators thought that it was some kind of a military vehicles, despite the fact that no, they definitely do not look military whatsoever. Yet it didn't matter for the Russians, and they called in a strike from their strike missile forces anyway. They've used the Iskander ballistic missile to actually target and strike against this column of the demining operations, and 2 people unfortunately got killed with 3 more injured. My condolences to friends and family of the people that got targeted. Russia is evil, and they are also stupidly evil. Thank you so much for watching today's video, a very brief and light episode. Sunday we will have the update on the front lines. Have a great weekend, everyone. Trust in Ukrainian armed forces, support Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.